Hello and welcome to my hotel room in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where last night I attended a great event co-hosted by the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America and an organization called Democracy First, which was a gathering of a whole bunch of veterans at a bar, a brewery down here, and a great conversation, which I was very happy to be in attendance of. And I may or may not stay for another night because this evening Heather Cox Richardson, the historian, is sitting down with author Joanne Freeman here in Philadelphia. Same organization sponsoring Democracy First, and they've invited me to stop by and say hello and hopefully cover the event, be in attendance of that as well. But I am here in Philadelphia in my hotel room doing the show, and I've got a good one for you. Michael Cohen is back after over a year in the penalty box because I didn't want to try to have a difficult conversation with him, but I did invite him back, and we had a great conversation like nothing had changed at all. Very professional and thoughtful. I really appreciated that and enjoyed it. Learned a lot from his perspective as always. And that conversation begins at 45 minutes. Because before that, I welcome back Glenn Kirschner to the show because justice matters. The great Glenn Kirschner joins me at 1 hour, 2 minutes. And I also check in with our friends Susie and Scott Haveman, who have been amazing, generous, thoughtful, kind, passionate, righteous members of the stand-up community for years. You might have met them in Vegas at Pod Jam where they are in attendance. They live in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and they went to knock doors in Mesa, Arizona over the weekend. A couple days ago, we talked about that. So that is also coming up for you. Michael Cohen, Glenn Kirschner, and our friends, the Havemans in New Mexico. All of that and your news coming your way. I've got your clips and your headlines. So let's get to it. Can't get to any of it without your support. Thank you for your paid subscriptions. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Welcome to Stephen Carter, who I just saw come in as a subscriber, and very happy to have you. Hope to see you all at tomorrow night's Hangout, where there will be much to talk about, including today's headlines and more. Of course, we'll have to discuss the hate fest at Madison Square Garden on Sunday, but more importantly, we will discuss Kamala Harris last night in Washington, D.C. That is today's big headline and where we start, because of course Sunday the disgraced former president and all of his goons got together to reenact a Nazi rally in Madison Square Garden, and they did a pretty good job, maybe even better than the Nazis did according to some historians. And with just a week left until Election Day, Kamala Harris delivered her speech last night, speech her campaign is calling a closing argument. She spoke at the Ellipse, the park in the shadow of the White House, where the disgraced former guy rallied the crowd that eventually stormed the Capitol on January 6th. Obviously, a not so subtle hint at the message that our vice president is trying to send. She talks about her life, her plans to lower costs, but the meat of her argument was a warning for undecided voters about what the future might look like if the disgraced former guy becomes the guy again. I'll play some clips and talk more about that coming up, but that was the big story last night, and 75,000 people apparently were there to see it, dwarfing Trump's numbers for the January 6th insurrection. And in other news, there was some other news yesterday. Stocks reached another record high. Can you believe it? With just under a week before the election, the NASDAQ jumped to a record close. Major tech names rise ahead of announced earnings. So that was a big headline yesterday. And historian Alan Lichtman has insisted that he's standing by his prediction about who will win the 2024 presidential race, despite recent polls and the race apparently tightening. I don't know if I buy that, by the way. He revealed he has never experienced so much hate in an election cycle. Welcome to political media, Alan Lichtman. Please act like you've been here before. I mean, he is an academic, but still. Known as the Nostradamus of polling due to the fact he's correctly predicted the results of the 9 out of 10 last presidential election since 1984. He says his keys to the White House will hold up, stands by his prediction that Kamala Harris will become the next president of the United States. I hope he's right. A bone-dry October is pushing nearly half of our country into a flash drought, leading to fires in the Midwest, hindering shipping on the Mississippi River. More than 100 different long-term weather stations in 26 states including Alaska, are having their driest October on record through this past Sunday. According to records by the Southern Regional Climate Center, Midwest Regional Climate Center, cities that had no measurable rain for October include New York, Houston, Dallas, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Sioux City, Iowa, along with normal dry spots such as LA, Las Vegas, and Phoenix. The National Weather Service records show, and this is on pace for a record dry October. So those leaves are dry and they are burning. There was a fire near me in Harriman State Park the other night in Rockland County, New York. Moving on, here's news that matters. The federal government is handing out $2.4 billion in railroad grants to help pay for 122 projects nationwide, with more than half of the money going to smaller railroads. The grants announced yesterday by the Federal Railroad Administration will go to projects in 41 states and Washington, D.C. Most of the money goes to track and bridge upgrades, but some of the grants will be used to bolster training, explore cleaner burning alternatives to the diesel railroads have long relied on. Some small railroads would also get help upgrading to more efficient locomotives. And I noticed yesterday that the Japanese are celebrating like 60 years with bullet trains, but we still haven't made that choice yet. That's still an important, sounds like a boring headline, but a really important headline if we want people to understand that government matters. Taxes matter. This is how we distribute resources so that we can get around and get stuff around safely, which we do a pretty damn good job of. So that's actually an important news story. And so is this. China declared a complete success after it launched a new 3-person crew to its orbiting space station early today, Wednesday. As a country, China seeks to expand its exploration of outer space with missions to the moon and beyond. Did you guys know that the Chinese had a space station? I didn't know that. China built its own space station after being excluded from the International Space Station, mainly because of the U.S. concerns over Chinese army and communist military parties' overall control of their space program. China's moon program is part of a growing rivalry with the U.S. and others, including Japan and India. Space race. Oh, great. China was mad that they were, all right, fine, you're not going to let us on a space station. We'll build our own Chinese space station. It'll be so much better than yours. I don't know. I mean, maybe it is. It probably has public transportation. That didn't make any sense. Okay, well, California judge yesterday sentenced the guy who broke into former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's home and attacked her husband with a hammer. This guy is going to be spending his life behind bars without the possibility of parole. Bye-bye, David DePape. You got to wonder exactly which right-wing media sources radicalized that guy, because they're definitely, I'm sure, to blame. Or was it Trump himself? So often criticizing Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi. And the Biden administration took steps to alleviate shortages of cancer drugs for children, part of a final push for one of the president's domestic priorities, reducing the nation's cancer burden. Biden's moonshot, he's called it, and that's something that he's kept a focus on and wants to finish strongly on, it would seem. Yesterday, Jeff Bezos, the billionaire Amazon founder who owns the Washington Post, defended the newspaper's decision to stop endorsing presidential candidates, arguing in part the move is a way to shore up credibility and combat perceptions of political bias. But guess what it didn't do? That. All right, moving on. Russian, Chinese, and Cuban operatives that tried to amplify false information about the 2 hurricanes that recently hit the United States, spreading lies about the government's disaster response, according to declassified intelligence. This is a really big story, and every news outlet that I'm seeing is reporting and covering it. It's getting buried, I think, by other political news, the presidential campaign, being a week away, but it's such important. I mean, we don't realize how much they are influencing us and animating us by sharing images and putting things on social media. In one case, Russian influence actors shared a fake image, likely generated with artificial intelligence, showing an allegedly flooded Disney World in Florida. A post on October 9th falsely claimed the U.S. federal government was denying disaster relief funds to Americans. Influencers linked to China have also seized on divisive material about hurricanes Helene and Milton, claiming without evidence on social media that the U.S. was spending on foreign conflicts and had undermined support for disaster victims. You saw all of those play out and more. Lots of different images that were put out by foreign countries to divide us. They did this in the election of 2016. It worked. It's hard to know how much of an effect it has on the outcome of the election, but I think it's a lot. These kinds of images and posts enrage people and put people in danger and absolutely affect if they vote, much less who they vote for, is my guess. That's my guess. I don't have data for it, but there are smarter people that do, and that's a very big and important story yesterday that came out, the influence campaigns by foreign countries on our election. And who do you think they're influencing them for? Mostly Trump, but also just to divide us, because the country divided, you cannot stand and all that. Yeah. Well, Aileen Cannon, very predictable. The federal judge overseeing prosecution of a man accused of trying to assassinate disgraced former president, she rejected this guy's request that she remove herself from the case, saying on Tuesday that she has no relationship with the disgraced former president, even though he appointed her to the bench and she has ruled in his favor in separate criminal matters. And there's talk that he's going to appoint her to AG if, God forbid, he were elected again. An Israeli airstrike yesterday in a residential building in northern Gaza killed dozens of people, the third time in just over a week that this town had been hit. The Biden administration said it had contacted Israeli government to ask about what a spokesman called a horrifying incident. Israeli officials who said that they were looking into the strike described the area as an active combat zone. Another Israeli strike yesterday in Lebanon killed at least 60 people. Hezbollah named a new leader as well, and he's surely to be assassinated within days. That guy's got a target on his back. And 10 years after it was established, the Vatican Commission on Clerical Sex Abuse issued its first report, which victims' advocates immediately criticized. So that was predictable. Since the start of the E. coli outbreak, apparently McDonald's daily U.S. sales have fallen, so that's not good for them. That's why these things matter so much to capitalists. But don't worry, if RFK is in charge of all of our health systems, which he said he would be yesterday if Trump wins, then we should be fine. I'm sure there won't be any more processed food and foodborne illnesses once RFK is in charge. Speaking of crazy rich people, Elon Musk apparently bought a secret compound that he hopes will house his children and at least two of their three mothers. He's got 11 kids. This time that we're in. It's so bizarre. The CDC warned of an unusual rise in walking pneumonia in children between 2 and 4. So that's a interesting and shocking development. And Terry Garr, the comedic actress who earned an Oscar nomination for a role in Tootsie, died yesterday, age 79 years old. A lot of people talking about her online. I saw that was important. Watched some old clips of her, which was really fun and funny. But those are all of the headlines that I have for you from the last 24 hours. Now let's get to some of the sound that I've gathered. It's time for clips. Clippity clips. You love the clips. You're here for the clips. Oh, I've got a lot of them for you today. All right, let's get started with, of course, Vice President Kamala Harris last night on the ellipse for 75,000 people. Everybody's talking about it. Let's start with a clip of her talking about the disgraced former guy at the site of the insurrection. And you can hear in the background there was this siren going off. I saw people talking about it on social media, and it was a bit of a distraction, but it didn't seem to fluster Kamala Harris. Here she is.
We know who Donald Trump is. He is the person who stood at this very spot nearly 4 years ago and sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol to overturn the will of the people in a free and fair election. An election that he knew he lost. Donald Trump has spent a decade trying to keep the American people divided and afraid of each other. That is who he is. But America, I am here tonight to say that is not who we are. That is not who we are.
The vice president then made clear why she's different than Joe Biden, what her top priorities would be.
When elected, I will walk in with a to-do list full of priorities of what I will get done for the American people. And I will work with everyone, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, to help Americans who are working hard and still struggling to get ahead. I have been honored to serve as Joe Biden's vice president. But I will bring my own experiences and ideas to the Oval Office. My presidency will be different because the challenges we face are different. Our top priority as a nation 4 years ago was to end the pandemic and rescue the economy. Now, our biggest challenge is to lower costs that were rising even before the pandemic and that are still too high.
All right. She also spoke directly to us, to those of us who aren't familiar with her or her policies. One more from Kamala Harris last night in her closing argument. And this is edited if it sounds a little disjointed. It's a spliced list of this part of the speech together.
I will enact the first ever federal ban on price gouging on groceries. Cap the price of insulin and limit out-of-pocket prescription costs for all Americans. As president, I will fight to help first-time home buyers with your down payment, take on the companies that are jacking up rents, and build millions of new homes. I'll fight for a child tax credit to save them some money, which will also lift American children out of poverty. I'll work to lower the cost of childcare, which is out of reach for too many working families today. We're going to change the approach and allow Medicare to cover the cost of home care so seniors can get the help and care they need in their own homes. When Congress passes a bill to restore reproductive freedom nationwide, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law. I will work with Democrats and Republicans to sign into law the border security bill that Donald Trump killed. At the same time, we must acknowledge we are a nation of immigrants. And I will work with Congress to pass immigration reform. As Commander-in-Chief, I will make sure America has the strongest, most lethal fighting force in the world. I will strengthen, not surrender, America's global leadership. And I will stand with our friends because I know that our alliances keep American people safe and make America stronger and more secure.
The vice president last night laying out her priorities. I saw this tweet last night from a guy named Ben Wexler who said, wait, she's talking about lowering prescription drug costs, expanding the child tax credit, reproductive rights, and making housing, elder care, and child care more affordable instead of making fun of minorities. And our friend Kim Nyborg quoted that tweet with, but did she have any celebrities that ripped their shirt off before she arm wrestled them? And where does she stand on Hannibal Lecter is what I'd like to know. We didn't get that info. How are we supposed to choose, says Kim, if we don't know how she stands on Hannibal Lecter? All right. Now, those are some of the highlights from her speech last night. Other things did happen. I do have some other clips for you from yesterday, but I highly recommend watching that whole speech. We'll talk about it on Thursday night at the Hangout, and the country will continue to talk about it because that was her closing argument. Now, here is Nikki Haley, she was on MSNBC, the former governor of South Carolina, and she worked for Trump as his UN ambassador. Of course, she ran against Trump. And now she's out there criticizing Trump because of his messaging. Listen to this.
But they also need to look at how they're talking about women. I mean, this bromance and this masculinity stuff, I mean, it borders on edgy to the point that it's going to make women uncomfortable. You know, you've got affiliated PACs that are doing commercials about calling Kamala the C word, or you had speakers at Madison Square Gardens, you know, referring to her and her pimps. That is not the way to win women. That is not the way to win people who are concerned about Trump style.
Yeah, that's right. She knows it. She knows that women are going to save us. Nikki Haley trashing the Trump campaign and trying to slowly separate herself from it. Now that it looks like maybe he won't win. I don't know. And here is on CNN yesterday, Victor Martinez. He is a Latino radio host in Pennsylvania. He says it's too late for Trump.
I'm wondering, Victor, his campaign is going to feature Zoraida Buxo, the shadow senator from Puerto Rico. We've heard reports that other prominent Puerto Ricans are going to be joining him. What do you think about that? What do you know about who else might be going there?
I haven't heard of anyone else being there, but I'll tell you this. None of those people matter. It's all about number one. Until Donald Trump doesn't himself acknowledge the fact that this was wrong, that this is unacceptable, that we will not tolerate this, I don't think none of that matter. He can bring anybody he wants from Puerto Rico, and I've heard it from my audience. It's too late now. He needed to say something right away that night or the day before or the day after, and he hasn't done it. By now, he can bring anybody he wants from Puerto Rico, and it's not going to make a difference.
Oh, wouldn't it be amazing if Puerto Rican Americans, voters in swing states, made all the difference? Sure would. Yeah, too late to apologize now. All right, here is Governor Tim Walz yesterday on the campaign trail.
I'm going to take just 1 second here before we wrap up to talk to the guys in this room, and thank you for coming. Think about this. Think for a moment about the women you love in your life, your partners, your wives, just all the rest of them. Their lives are at stake in this election. That's what's here. Donald Trump's the one who appointed those Supreme Court justices, those three, who overturned Roe versus Wade. Now, young women in this room, you've got less rights than your moms had. 20 states, including this state, have a Trump abortion ban. He calls them a beautiful thing. Georgia, you're seeing it here. You know what a beautiful thing looks like. Amber Thurman, mom of 6-year-old boy, medical assistant, dreaming of being a nurse. Trump took down Roe. She was forced to wait 20 hours to get urgent medical care she desperately needed. Her death was found to be preventable when she couldn't get the care she needed here. As a parent, as an American, as a human being, that makes me sick as hell that would happen. We're hearing these stories all across the country. Women are turned away from emergency rooms, having miscarriages in parking lots, survivors of rape and incest being forced to carry those pregnancies to term, and fertility clinics turning people away at the door. And I said, none of these women. Amber wouldn't want to have her name out there. Her family's grieving over her death. But we're out here because we know what they've done could be worse. For Gwen and I, we struggled for years to have kids. We used fertility treatments. We finally had that beautiful daughter, and I have to tell you, I will be damned if I'll allow any politician, let alone Donald Trump, make that decision for your family.
Yeah, very well delivered by Tim Walz. And, you know, I just loved it. I love that argument. I love men talking to men about these issues. And speaking of men, President Biden stepped in a pile of shit last night when it seemed like he referred to Trump supporters as garbage. Here it is.
Or Puerto Rico, where I'm in my home state of Delaware, they're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization of things is unconscionable, and it's un-American.
A lot of people interpreted him saying that Trump supporters are garbage. And, of course, Hillary Clinton called them deplorables, remember? And will it matter? Well, it certainly occupied a lot of time in the right-wing echo chamber yesterday. People tried to make a huge deal out of that, including J.D. Vance, who pretended to be mad about it. But, of course, Trump has actually said much, much worse about more than half of all Americans every single day. I hope nobody pretends to believe this false outrage from those on the right, including J.D. Vance. And others are saying that he misspoke, quickly clarified his meaning. The Puerto Rican, when he says Puerto Rico is an island of garbage, quote, was rehearsed the night before, made it through the Trump campaign vetting, and was spoken as the speaker intended. So, yeah, nice try, everybody. Later on, actually, Joe Biden put out like a clarifier as well, just to make sure anybody wasn't confused. Certainly, Trump has never done that. But, of course, he's not the candidate for president. Kamala Harris is. And last night she said if she wins, she'll always listen to Trump supporters and give them a seat at the table. But, of course, if Donald Trump wins, then his Harris supporters are the enemy. So which would you rather be, garbage or the enemy? Anyway, that was a ridiculous controversy that was playing out last night as a result of Joe Biden's comments. And I thought this was an interesting moment for the former president, the good one, President Obama. He was in Philadelphia and asking this question. Here's about almost 2 minutes from President Obama.
If you're a Christian and you care deeply about the abortion issue, I understand that, but does that mean you'll support somebody who seems to violate pretty much every precept of the Ten Commandments. If you are a service member and you're somewhat conservative and you're used to voting Republican, I can understand it, but somebody who genuinely does not believe in duty and honor and does not understand why anybody would sacrifice themselves on behalf of their country, why would you do that? If you're a Muslim American and you're upset about what's happening in the Middle East, why would you put your faith in somebody who passed a Muslim ban and repeatedly suggested that somehow you weren't part of our American community? If you're an African American or Latino, if you're from Puerto Rico and you see somebody whose values seem to indicate that you're not part of their equation, how do you think it's okay? How can you tell yourself it's okay as long as our side wins?
All right, President Obama in Philadelphia with part of his closing argument, and he does not always deliver the same speech. He's obviously updating it day to day, and these clips then get seen. I think it's important. Love that guy and think he's doing a very effective job out there every day. Anybody who was wondering where he was, oh, he's been there the whole time. Here's comedian Trey Crowder on the infamous Madison Square Garden rally this past weekend. 3 minutes with one of the best comedians and commentators out there. I always love to play these clips when he puts them out.
So Trump had a Nazi rally last weekend. I'm sorry. They really don't like it when you call it a Nazi rally. They're very easily offended as a rule. That's my bad. Let me get it right. Trump had a hyper-nationalist rally categorized by overtones of violence and hate-fueled fear-mongering. There we go. My fault. Anyway, the whole thing did not go over great, especially comedian Tony Hinchcliffe, whose performance pissed a lot of people off, which is strange considering he employed the typically bulletproof approach of insulting Puerto Ricans while in New York. If you don't know, Tony's mostly known for being the host of a popular podcast wherein he listens to overly confident comedians deliver underwritten shock value jokes for a bit, and then he tells them that they suck and should quit forever. It's always nice when the universe plays a Uno reverse card. Am I right? But anyway, a lot of Tony's success is attributed to his friendship with Joe Rogan. So for any fans of chaos theory out there, that means that one night at the Comedy Store 15, 20 years ago, a profoundly stoned Joe Rogan thought to himself, that guy sounds super gay, but he says he's not gay. That's hilarious. And as a direct result of him having that thought, now Puerto Ricans might elect a black woman president. Butterfly wings ain't got shit on that, y'all. But the Trump campaign's already trying to distance themselves from Hinchcliffe. Dude, you know how bad you have to bomb for them to even kind of apologize for you? You're like, dude, them apologize? I mean, that's like Boeing taking the battery cables off of a whistleblower's nipples. Like, they just don't do that kind of thing, all right? But they are here. All right, they're already saying, like, no, we do not approve of this material. The campaign simply does not have time to vet every speaker we put on that stage. I love that a presidential campaign's actual defense of itself is like, look, we didn't plan this. We're just stupid and incompetent. Okay? Right. Give us a break here. But it's also a lie. I mean, there was a teleprompter there. There's been reports of other jokes being cut from the act. They knew what he was going to say on account of he said exactly the type of things that they hired him to say. Right. This is what happens when half of your campaign staff is made up of white dudes who grew up saying the N-word on 4chan. Right? They got what they wanted. Even if they somehow didn't know what he was going to say, it's like, what did you expect him to do? Give a reasoned take on the current situation in Gaza through a humanitarian lens? Like, he's a edgelord insult comic. This would be like if they said, listen, guys, when we hired Hulk Hogan, we didn't know he was going to rip his shirt open. Come on. It's like, no, they got exactly what they wanted because it wasn't just Hinchcliffe. The whole night was wall-to-wall bat-shittery, capped off by the bat-shitter-in-chief, Donald Trump, who solidified his place atop the list of history's dumbest demagogues with another patented stream of nigh incoherent, rambling, malicious lunacy. Like, the entire evening could not have possibly been more on brand for them, and they don't get to pretend otherwise just because they apparently didn't know that Puerto Ricans are allowed to vote. Okay, and vote they should. It should matter. This rally should make a difference because it was both a crystal clear snapshot of the world these people already live in and a harrowing glimpse at the future they have in store for the rest of us if we don't show up and show out between now and next Tuesday. All right? Love y'all.
Yeah, love y'all. Love that from Trey Crowder. And, well, that's what I've got for you. There's so many other clips, things I'd love to play, but I want to get this show posted for you to listen. I love making it, but I love sharing it even more. So let's get to it with my guests. I've got Glenn Kirschner and Michael Cohen coming up. But first, I wanted to share my conversation with Scott and Susie Haveman, who have been longtime listeners of this show. They joined us out at Pod Jam. I joined them for dinner. They were very generous, took me out to dinner in New York a few weeks back, and we had a great time. I really like these folks. They're hardworking, awesome, thoughtful, very smart, funny, great people. Susie's actually on the city council there in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where they live. She was elected back in 2022. And they told me that they wanted to get out and be the change that they wanted to see, and they wanted to knock on doors. They wanted to make a difference. They were in Arizona last week. They flew there and quickly got out, and the scorching, dry, awful heat in Arizona and knocked on lots of doors. So I said, hey, I'd love to hear how that went. I'd love to hear about the experience, the good, the bad. And for those of us who don't exactly like the idea of going out and knocking on strangers' doors, could we do it? Shall we do it? Should we do it this time or in the future? Scott and Susie are awesome. I called them. Here is our conversation. All right. Well, I'm told you about Scott and Susie, and of course, they've been longtime listeners. We met them in Vegas at Pod Jam. If you were there, you may have met them. I got to have dinner with them a few weeks back when they were in New York before they went to their son's wedding in beautiful Vermont, and they've just returned from Arizona where they were knocking on doors. They're very active. They're very engaged, and I asked them if I could talk with them about that experience in hopes that other people would consider it, or just to celebrate and thank them for doing what they did, which is knock on 175 doors in the swing state of Arizona. Scott and Susie, welcome to the show officially. Thank you very much for letting me call you.
Oh, thanks for having us.
And Susie, are you there?
I am here, and thank you, Pete.
That's the part where I have to hear both your voices to make sure that you're both present. There you go. You guys live, of course, in Los Alamos. You live in New Mexico. You also just hosted Matt Carlson for one of his concerts, which is very cool. They are awesome, generous, thoughtful, kind, smart contributors to their community and ours. And so what was your idea here? You guys, Susie, thought, let's go to Arizona. It's the closest swing state to us, and let's get involved and do something for a couple days.
You got it. We knew we wanted to do something. We contemplated going to Pennsylvania, but we really just ran out of time. I'm a current elected official here on the Los Alamos County Council myself, so only had a little window of time. So it was kind of relatively easy to just fly, drive to Albuquerque, hop on a plane to Phoenix on Saturday morning. It was kind of a last minute trip. And we just felt like we needed, as you say, Pete, be the change you want to see in the world. As Michelle Obama says, do something. And we were just restless and agitated and stressed. So we said, we needed to release and try to know that we can make a difference and not wake up the day after Election Day and think all we did was write checks.
But we're still agitated and stressed, but at least we did something.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm sure we all are. But you see, all we did is write checks. I mean, there's so many different things people can do depending on their resources and their time. But you guys seem to try to make time to do it all. So, Scott, you got involved with local Democrats and then found out information and landed in Arizona and got right out there. Is that right?
That's right. It's pretty impressive how we just we're given some contacts for the Arizona Democratic Party, and we got on their website, signed up, and next thing you know, we're in Mesa, Arizona, at a little house that some woman had basically turned into Democratic headquarters for her precinct. And cars is coming up. They give you clipboards with your assignments for the morning, and off you go.
And it's baking hot, Susie, and you're out there knocking on doors. Why in that area of Mesa? What kind of area is that politically? I felt like that's where that Republican mayor is from, who is supporting Kamala Harris, and I think spoke even at the DNC.
He did. Good plug there. And he is beloved by all the volunteers whom we met. It is more of an R country, but there is certainly a ton of independents and a good number of registered Democrats who had not yet voted. So that's who we were assigned to go, try to reach out to. And it was I guess I just have always believed in almost everything. Activity begets activity and enthusiasm begets enthusiasm. So our time was worthwhile because these folks, as Scott mentioned, who were, opening up their home and doing all this coordinating and organizing and delegating, they were so stoked that they were there. They were just elated. They couldn't believe people came in from New Mexico, and there was another couple from San Francisco. And there were people from all over Arizona coming in to knock doors in that area because there's a lot of down ballot races that are also really crucial there.
Did you
kind of on a thread?
Did you feel like it sounds like they were really organized and strategic? Overall, that's the case with the campaign. But, you can often show up at a place and they're not as organized they are, and you just feel out that you went out and you weren't that effective. People didn't answer doors or they weren't Democrats, or they were even worse, people who hated you and slammed the door in your face. So how did you feel in terms of the effectiveness of that organization? This is to either one of you, of course.
I think they were very effective in making sure that our time was targeted and well spent. That they also, warned us that what we might encounter. They knew that we were going into some Trump neighborhoods. We were going into neighborhoods that were very LDS dominant. They would tell us this is going to be there's a lot of families. This neighborhood might be a little bit irritated by you knocking on them. These people are going to welcome you. So we kind of had some, I don't know what the word, we had some coaching.
If you can have any preparation as to who will open a door, that is helpful. And you still don't know, because maybe it's their kid or the Airbnb guest, but LDS, of course, is Mormons. And so even if they don't like you, they're the friendliest people in the world. Don't tell me they gave you a hard time.
They were fabulous, especially when the young teenage kids answered the door.
Yeah.
Delightful. Yeah. And so we did have a lot of doors, unfortunately, that went unanswered. It was hotter than heck. It just felt like we couldn't tell if people were home or not. Everyone has those Ring doorbells. We don't have too many of them here in Los Alamos, but everybody has those Ring things with the cameras. So we don't know if they can see us with our little bag and our little buttons. But we like to, just having been on the receiving end of that, you got to think, if you kind of really are on the fence of who you're going to vote for, or you just really haven't motivated, or you've been procrastinating, you come home and you see that little thing, you maybe you subliminally you see that packet, maybe it is the thing that finally nudges you.
Did you get any idea of what the Republican organization was like? I've heard that they're doing very little, that they're not very present, that they're not canvassing and calling and doing all of the traditional things to get out the vote the way Democrats. They're doing it, but not the way that Democrats are. Did you talk to anybody, see or hear anything about the Republican operation in Arizona?
Yeah, we talked to the Democratic organizers, and they have friends who are Republicans, and they're saying no. The Republican ground game, at least in this area, is basically non-existent. There's just billboards, and that is it.
I hear that a lot, and it's so weird.
I really think that's being out there. It emphasized to me how important a ground game is, because we did run into people who say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to vote, but I haven't done it yet." And it's nice reminding them, you've got till today, basically, in Mesa, to mail in your ballot. Or it just forced people to really make a decision and get off the wagon and get the work done, get their vote turned in.
Tell me about a good conversation you had knocking on a door, maybe a not so good one or experience.
So one of our favorite anecdotes, kind of piggybacking on that, is that this one woman, she literally hugged us because she says, "I've already voted, but my husband, I have been on his case all week, and the packet is sitting on our dining room table, and I didn't even know that Monday was the final day to mail it in. And okay, this is what I needed. I'm telling him no dinner tonight unless he votes, and we take it down to the drop box." I mean, that was just really cute. Mm-hmm. And she literally hugged us. Loved it. And then there was a couple of young people who said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you. You guys are smart people, and we appreciate you, and you're going to motivate me to want to volunteer." Mm-hmm. One young man said that.
And
I love that. I mean, did you tell people? I mean, my intro is I came all the way from New York. Did you tell people I came from, I'm not from here, but it's so important. This state is so important. I came all the way here. Is that too self-serving and virtuous for you?
That's exactly what we did. It's like we're in from New Mexico to help get the vote out and help Arizona
Is it true that someone said people live there?
We had that question many a time.
Is that really part of the United States?
So what you were going to say, I think, Scott, something else about another experience knocking on doors.
We didn't have any. We're knocking on doors is outside of my comfort zone. And I just want to encourage people that it really isn't that bad. We never had anyone say, "Get off my lawn," so to speak.
Yeah.
There was no quote unquote bad experience, not a terrible experience. We had people say, "Nope, you come to the wrong house," and that was about as difficult as it got.
Yeah, they wouldn't even take the packet, because then I would say, "We'd like to at least have the packet to kind of thumb through it." No, but they were maybe borderline rude, but nobody was nasty.
Right.
Nobody.
I think that's an important point, because most of us are outside our comfort zone, knocking on strangers' doors, and probably always have been since, except for one night a year coming up. And it's weird. And now everybody is, very scared they're going to get shot, or something in between. And that doesn't really ever happen. And so I'm very happy that, you can have rude people and bad experiences. But I think, as you said, the good experiences hopefully outweigh them. And even if you're not keeping track, just the fact that you did it has got to feel great. So in conclusion, how do you feel about the work you did, and what would you say to others for the days remaining or an upcoming campaign? Because you are two very civic-minded, socially conscious people, probably more so than most folks. But still, I want your take on the whole thing, Susie.
Well, speaking of civic-minded people, probably the highlight of all the doors we knocked on was a home that kind of stuck out like a beautiful thumb, not a sore thumb, because it was just populated with Ruben Gallego and Kamala Harris, et cetera, signs, and a Ukrainian flag in their entry porch. And we were surprised because it showed a 28-year-old woman, registered Democrat, who had not yet voted. So we're like, well, maybe she just forgot. So we go to knock on the door, and they invited, a couple answers the door. They invited us in because we were scorching hot, sweating bricks. And they said we had to come in for a beer. So we went in for a beer, and come to find out, she is the president of the Mesa Public Schools School Board, an elected official, Democrat. She's on her second year in that term. When she campaigned 2 years ago, she experienced many of the things you've experienced in your hometown with the pedophilia and the transgender accusations, and people did horrible things to her and her campaign signs, and her family was frightened. And come to find out, her husband used to be the city manager of Mesa, Arizona. For 6 years, he held that role. Now he's the head of a nonprofit there. So it was, you just never know who you're going to meet and some of the stories. So we actually name dropped you. We said, oh my gosh, we had this favorite podcast, Stand Up with Pete Dominic. So he actually wrote it down. He's like, Pete who? And we said, because he wanted to be involved in his local school board, but he experienced some of the same things, et cetera, on and on.
Cool.
That was really a rewarding experience. We exchanged email addresses. I mean, because that's a huge school district, 8,000 employees, and she's the president.
Yeah, it's interesting and terrifying and upsetting to hear that everybody everywhere is experiencing the same terrible experiences of the playbook that they're using and issues that they're being concerned about. Definitely forward me that email. I'll reach out to them. Otherwise, this guy's going to be listening to Pete Davidson's podcast for.
Well, for me, it was just a nice reminder when you met this nice 65-year-old grandmother with purple hair, that she's how brave people are to put up with the pedophilia accusations and just to do the right thing and just fight the fight.
Yeah.
It's a place that really needs a lot of work, Mesa.
Yes.
It's a lot to ask of a person to work on or volunteer on a campaign, especially a school board thing, and then they get called a child abuser or a pedophile, because just that allegation can damage your entire career, your business, whatever you sell, whatever you do. Just the idea that someone would say that is so much worse than calling someone a racist or a bigot or a sexist or an anti-Semite, calling someone a pedophile. And that's why it works. And so people, I understand why people don't want to get involved, but you've got to, at this point, everybody is being called these horrible names. So it's like, all right, then we all are. All the teachers are abusing the kids. I mean, it's just, It's preposterous. It's ridiculous. It's maddening, but people got to stand up. And it sounds like these people are, and you guys always are. So thank you very much for talking to me. And I hope if anybody's in New Mexico, Los Alamos, look up Scott and Susie. They are amazing. And I am planning to come out there and ski this winter. So join me with Scott and Susie. They are the kindest, best, most awesome people ever. Thank you guys for doing this and for doing that. And let's talk again soon.
Looking forward to it.
Sounds great, Pete. Thanks.
There you go, Scott and Susie Havemann. Thank you so much for joining me from Los Alamos. It was great to talk to you, and I really appreciate you doing that and being great role models, sharing with us your experience. But now it's time to get to Glenn Kirschner, who is my next guest on today's show, and my conversation with Michael Cohen is still coming up because I work real hard on this for you. Consider that if you want to upgrade your subscription or get one for the first time. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Who else brings you this variety of amazing, thought-provoking, informative guests that hopefully may help you understand what the hell is going on and keep us grounded here on Earth One. Glenn Kirschner, of course, a 30-year former federal prosecutor. You know him on MSNBC. Of course, his own channels. You can find him on YouTube. Subscribe to his podcast, Justice Matters Everywhere. Glenn Kirschner, support him on Patreon. Of course, I was with him just this past August at his Justice Matters gathering where he gave me the big award I've told you about that sits in the background of my shot if you've ever seen the videos from me at the home studio. Anyway, this is about 18 minutes and it ended abruptly because my computer or his froze, and so we had to wrap it up anyway. But I love Glenn Kirschner. Here it is. Here we are. We're a week away. Glenn Kirschner is one of the people I got a lot of people asking me to have on during this time period because I don't know. You're supposed to make us feel better. Hi, my friend.
Pete, how you doing? It's good to see you again.
You're on edge just like the rest of us. You're terrified. You're worried about a week away. What's on your mind? What are you thinking about? That rally last night, did you like that? Did you see the rally at MSG?
I didn't see it, but I read about it and I saw the lowlights of it played on an endless loop now. That raging race rally, it is what I guess we've come to expect from Donald Trump and his merry band of miscreants, but it still knocks the wind out of you to see a celebration of hate and indecency and prejudice and misogyny and dictatorship. It was a celebration of all of that. But let me start with a little bit of silver lining. I happen to believe one man's opinion, right? Opinions are like elbows. Everybody's got a couple and they're not much use to anybody else, but I'll offer mine. I think she's going to win. Harris is going to win in a landslide. Joe Biden was not a particularly good campaigner. He was very good at governing. He was one hell of a president. He put a great team around him and he helped pull our ass out of the national dumpster fire that Donald Trump lit and then walked away. He was great at governing, but he's not good at campaigning. I don't think that's a secret or a revelation. Who's good at campaigning? Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. They are good at. I get goosebumps. I don't get goosebumps watching politicians. I get goosebumps listening to these people and their genuine concern for everybody in our country, including the middle class, not just the damn oligarchs, the American mullahs, right? So mullahs as in Iran or as in money mullah. I guess either one works.
Yeah.
So I think she's going to win by a landslide. Joe Biden won by 7 million votes. I happen to believe, not a political pundit, she's going to win by more than 10 million votes. Now, I know it's about the battleground states. I think we're going to do fine in the battleground states, too. But then what did we hear at the raging racist rally? We heard Donald Trump say, Mikey Johnson and I have a little something up our sleeve to steal the election this time. He didn't say that second part, but that's what he was talking about. We all know it. There's no secret that he's going to try to pull a repeat of January 2020. But here's the good news, Pete. He was president in January 2020. That's how he was able to set up the Capitol to be taken, by depriving the Capitol of federal law enforcement resources that they needed to protect against the Trump-launched attack. Right. He ain't president now. Somebody needs to tell Donald he can have all the little secret deals with Mikey Johnson he wants, but he's not president. Biden is. And the Supreme Court has said, Pete, this is mind-blowing to me. Think about this. The Supreme Court, in the aptly titled case, Donald Trump versus the United States, because that's what we are living in. Donald Trump versus us, right? The Supreme Court said Donald Trump can commit all the damn crimes he wants against the American people to try to steal an election, to try to unlawfully retain the power of the presidency, provided he's simply exercising his core constitutional functions, like telling the DOJ and the military what to do. He gets to do it without any criminal liability. Guess who else has that power? Joe Biden. What does that look like? Do we expect Joe Biden to start ordering people to kidnap and unlawfully detain folk to stop them from stealing the 2024 election? I probably wouldn't bet a buck on Joe Biden doing it. But you know what? He has the authority of the Supreme Court to do it. Go ahead.
Just getting creative during the time period after the election when there is sure to be challenges and Donald Trump's crying, which is interpreted in a cult by millions as marching orders. During that time, Joe Biden's still president. And you're saying there's all kinds of different powers the Supreme Court has unfortunately given the president. And since it's Joe Biden, he should consider exercising those powers during that time to make sure that whatever Trump's got planned with Mike Johnson doesn't come to fruition. But what it could be is that the House has a lot of power in confirming the election, doesn't it?
It does if we sit back and let them nefariously decline to confirm Kamala Harris's election win. Yes, we can sit back and let them be lawless, right? Let them play all these games about, we think we recounts. We got to go back to this day. Or Joe Biden can take the reins. I'm not urging him to commit crimes, even though the Supreme Court has said, okay, good to go, Mr. President. You can commit crimes as long as they're within your core constitutional powers. And Pete, let me tell you what that means, because this is what the Supreme Court said. He can order his military or the FBI to detain people without cause, without due process, without evidence, because it is the core constitutional power of a president to direct his DOJ officials and his military.
Right.
He can do it, and he can do it with impunity, according to the Supreme Court. I'm not saying that's what Joe Biden ought to do, but what I am saying is Joe Biden can't sit back and let Mikey Johnson and Dirty Donald commit all the crimes they want to commit to steal the election or try to steal it again, because we know that's what they're going to do.
What happens to the investigations into Donald Trump? I thought we might as well just call it, by the way. How many conversations did we have? How many videos did you make? Appearances did you make speculating on whether or not any of these cases against him would unfold before the election? We're a week away. Nothing unfolded before the election in any of these cases, right?
And we are now the last jury. You, me, and the American voters, we've been selected as the last jury standing between Donald Trump and dictatorship, right? No other jury will be impaneled because Donald Trump and his Supreme Court have successfully delayed his criminal trials. But we're the jury. We get to go to the polls on November 5th. And based on the evidence we've seen, just as if we were sitting in a wooden box with 11 fellow jurors, we get to vote Donald Trump guilty on November 5th. So I'm looking forward. I've already voted. My wife and I have already voted down here in Virginia. But no other criminal trials will come to fruition. And to answer your question, I wrote a piece for MSNBC that went up, I think, yesterday, setting out how Donald Trump has already announced that he has a plan to, can I say shit can? That's a legal term, actually, in New Jersey. To shit can all of his federal criminal cases by what? Appointing Aileen Cannon as Attorney General. She is reportedly on his short list to be AG. She has already decided that special counsel is just not a thing. Every other judge dating back to the 18 in our criminal justice system, because that's how far back independent counsel and special prosecutors go, every other judge in every other court has said special counsel is lawful and constitutional. She said, nope, not in my courtroom. And that's the ruse she used to dismiss Donald Trump's classified documents, obstruction of justice, espionage case down in Florida. So Donald Trump says, I got to put her on the short list because if she is confirmed by the Senate, if I nominate her to be Attorney General, she's already announced special counsel's not a thing. So she will fire Jack Smith. And then basically my federal prosecutions are dead.
I feel like what is not said enough, and it's the scariest idea, is that when he had power for 4 years, he didn't have full power. He couldn't do whatever he wanted. And he had a lot of people that stood up against him, ones that we really don't like, but they stood up against him and said, I can't carry out that order. That's an unlawful order. That would be an illegal thing, or they slow walk things. The difference is now the Supreme Court has made a decision that he can do almost anything and not get in trouble. So when he packs his administration with loyalists, that's what they call them in other countries, but certainly that would be the case, they're all more likely to carry out his unlawful orders because they're no longer unlawful. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. When I entered the Army, the JAG Corps, after you go to law school, you pass a bar exam, you go to Army Law School. It's called the JAG School. It's on the campus of the University of Virginia down in Charlottesville. And they drill into our heads, Pete, two things. One, you must obey lawful orders, but even more importantly, you must disobey unlawful orders. And that's not always an easy call. But General Milley understands that. Kelly understands that. Mattis understands that. But those people will not be part of a second Trump administration. It'll be all these flunkies and lapdogs and lackeys and sycophants who will follow Donald Trump's unlawful commands. And then this is going to sound like hyperbole. We are slouching toward the end of our republic, and we're going to lapse into a dictatorship. Donald Trump has said dictator on day one. For gosh sakes, take him at his word.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that's how he's going to try to run the place. He's got that J.D. Vance, that hollow barrel in support of him, and he's going to have a whole bunch of others. And I just have to wonder about what the Supreme Court decides. I think you might be right. It's possible Kamala Harris wins big. She's got to win big. Otherwise, if it's close in one or two states, the challenges I can't even imagine. We already saw what happened last time. It will be clearly similar to that. What are your concerns about the way the courts handle that, and obviously the highest court in the land?
Yeah, so last time around, 2020, the courts held, right, all 60-plus bogus lawsuits that were brought by the Giulianis and the Powells. And given what's happened to those people, you would think Donald Trump might have a tough time recruiting a new batch of dirty lawyers because they're going to end up going the way of Powell and Giuliani. Unless we lapse into dictatorship, then they probably are richly rewarded by the king. So I think the courts held last time, including the Supreme Court, which had the same makeup that it has right now. They refused, Pete, to accept review of a single one of those bogus election challenge cases. That's good news. Let's hope they hold fast again. But given the opinions they've been handing down, contrary to the express language, the text of the Constitution, in many respects, like the disqualification case, the 14th Amendment case, where you read Section 3. It says, take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, and then engage in insurrection. You are disqualified from holding office.
Yeah.
The only way you can hold office is if both houses of Congress vote 2/3 to remove the disqualification. Donald Trump is an adjudicated insurrectionist in both a trial court and a state Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, when have we ever paid attention to the text of the Constitution? We don't need that. That gives me real heartburn that maybe the Supreme Court is not going to hold this time around.
Makes me think, and I think about this often, had he been impeached, he wouldn't be able to run for president again.
Impeached and convicted by the Senate.
And convicted by the Senate. He was impeached by the House, but the Senate did not convict him either time.
Did not convict him.
He would not. The Constitution bars you from running again.
I don't believe the Constitution really only has 4 qualifiers or disqualifiers: 35 years of age, natural born citizen, resident of the United States for 14 years, and you have not engaged in insurrection. Donald Trump did the last thing, but the Supreme Court knocked that one out of the box. So I don't know. I'm trying to process it through my slow moving mind this afternoon. I don't think there is a constitutional bar to somebody who was impeached by the House, convicted on the articles of impeachment in the Senate, unless it was, for example, for insurrection. Then you're an insurrectionist and you're disqualified by the 14th Amendment.
It doesn't really matter because he wasn't impeached, just something I think about from time to time if that was the case. So we've got just a few days left, and I have to ask you about this other, I guess it's a legal issue, election law. I'm not sure how familiar you are with it, but this billionaires controlling campaigns, specifically Elon Musk, basically taking over the Trump campaign and giving money away to register, whatever he's doing to give this $1 million giveaway, gets everybody to sign up. It's like a lottery. And a lot of people are saying the Department of Justice should have shut this down. Apparently they haven't. And now the Attorney General in Pennsylvania, where he's doing this, apparently is investigating it. That was news today. Is this hard? Is this complicated?
Yes, it was probably not complicated. I am not an election law expert or a campaign finance or a PAC expert by any means. But what I have read about what Musk is doing is probably violating the letter or the spirit of the law, but maybe not the letter of the law, because he's not buying votes or buying registration. What he's doing is saying, I'm paying you to sign my petition supporting the First and Second Amendments. So it's a workaround. And I am a critic of the Department of Justice's inaction and Merrick Garland's inaction over the years, which I think is part of the reason we are where we are today, because the crimes of Trump and others, including members of Congress who asked for pardons for the crimes they acknowledged by asking for the pardons they committed on and around January 6th, have gone completely unaccountable. That's why we are where we are. And that's why they're trying to do it all over again. And they're doubling down in many instances. So I don't know why all Merrick Garland felt he could do was a sternly worded letter to Elon Musk when the district attorney for Philadelphia said, no, I'm bringing suit to stop you. Now, maybe he's bringing suit because the Pennsylvania state lottery laws are more directly being violated by what Elon Musk is doing than the federal election laws. That's why I don't want to start complaining that the feds should do more. But it seems to me if the attorney general makes the legal determination that I can send a letter telling him to stop because what you're doing is wrong, then can you also not bring suit if what he's doing is wrong? If you didn't have a legal challenge to make, I don't know that the attorney general would sign a letter telling you to stop. So it feels like DOJ should be doing more, but not my area of expertise.
Yeah, Justice Matters, Glenn Kirschner. Hopefully you liked that, appreciated it. Go let Glenn know that you heard him here on the show. Try to get some clips out for you as well. Subscribe and support to everything that he is doing. And now it's time to get to my final guest of today's show. Last but certainly not least, it's great to get Michael Cohen back on the show. Of course, a former Boston Globe columnist, now contributes to the Daily Beast, but he's running his own shop called Truth and Consequences, his Substack. Go subscribe, support him there. It's been over a year since he was on because we had an argument, and then he kept trying to reach out to me to talk about it, and I just basically ghosted him and ignored him. I mean, I didn't ignore him. I got back to him, of course, but I just never wanted to have that difficult conversation. But we patched things up, and it's on me, my fault. I can do better, be more mature, be more communicative and thoughtful and honest and transparent with anybody when I've got a problem with something that they said that I took personally, which is basically what happened with Michael and I. I put it on me, not on him. I was glad to have him back on the show, and I hope you appreciate my conversation with him and support his work. This was a really helpful conversation to get his perspective on things just a few days out. Let's do it right now with the Speech Boy. That's his handle on Twitter, former speechwriter, of course, author of books, all-around smart guy. It's Michael Cohen. Many of you have asked where he is. He's right here. He's back. He's back. I am over my problems that I had, maturity issues, communication issues. And I'm really happy to see you. And I'm really happy to have your voice back on the podcast. You have been missed. A lot of people wanted you to come back on the show. So I'm very excited to have you here just a few days before, I don't know, whatever's going to happen. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
What do you think is going to happen?
What do I think is going to happen? Okay, so that's a great question. And let me answer this two ways. On the one hand, I think the data doesn't really lend itself to an obvious conclusion about what's going to happen. I don't think you can draw from the data a sense of who's going to win. I wrote about this last week for my newsletter, basically saying that my hunch is she wins. And it's based on really my theory of this election, which has been the theory of election since the beginning, which is that Donald Trump is a high floor, low ceiling candidate, and that he can only get around 47% of the vote in the election. And I think that he has and if Harris gets the turnout that she needs, if she gets the voters that she needs to come out and vote, she has a higher ceiling, she's more likely to win. And from that perspective, I think based on what I'm seeing with early voting, based on what I'm seeing as far as enthusiasm among Democrats, I think that she's going to do that. I guess I think she's going to win. I'm not predicting she's going to win, but if you were to put a gun to my head, I think more likely than not. I'll go a different way. But I think if you would rather be in her shoes than his shoes right now. That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
And I think that, look, a lot of things can happen. I think a lot of why we don't know what's going to happen is because we don't know which polling error to believe is going to take place. Is this like 2016 and 2020 in which Trump's vote was underestimated? Or is this more like 2022 and 2023 in which Democratic votes was underestimated? And people forget this, but in 2022, most of the polls had Democrats not picking up the Senate or not holding on to the Senate and not only losing a handful of seats in the House. And of course, that's what they did. I think that is the more likely trajectory of that kind of polling error where we underestimate Democratic votes. And so that's why I think she's going to win. But again, not a prediction because it's really hard to draw that from the data.
From the data. And you're mostly referring to polling data, right?
Yeah, polling data.
The only thing that keeps giving me a lot of hope is the get out the vote effort by the Harris campaign, which I've heard is not nearly as equivalent with the Trump campaign. And I'm not sure how true that is, but from the anecdotes that I've experienced and heard, there's a lot of merit to that. And that seems to matter. You can have whatever polls you want. People have to go and vote. And so we do have some data on the early vote that you mentioned, and you can break that down. But what do you think just about that point of getting out the vote, the operations mattering? And she's got one that, I mean, you could be someone in a swing state's getting like 9 calls a day by 7 different well-meaning people saying, do you need anything? Do you want some soup?
Yeah.
Do you have a place to go? Do you need a pillow? What do you need? I can hook you up. What do you think about that?
So it's a great question. I think the ground games can be really important. They can also be overstated slightly. I think we can say with some certainty the Obama ground game, there's a lot of evidence the Obama ground game in 2008 and 2012 did actually move a good number of voters and probably helped ensure his victory, although I probably would have won either way. In 2016, of course, Trump didn't have much of a ground game, still won. What I think is important about this election is that the Trump strategy for victory is that they're relying on occasional voters, people who don't always turn out to vote in every election, which is fine. It's not a great strategy because you're relying on people who don't vote in every election. That's not necessarily who you want to rely on. You want to rely on people who vote every election, which is the Democratic constituency right now, which is black voters and suburban women, suburban voters who tend to vote every election. Educated voters tend to live in suburbia. They vote quite often. They vote every election. That's who you want to rely on. So Republicans are relying on these sort of occasional voters, which is fine if you have a way to mobilize them. They don't. They have a lousy ground game. And so that does strike me as a real problem for the Trump people. That to me is the biggest way this could have an impact. And from what I'm hearing, the ground game for the Harris campaign has been pretty damn good so far.
Yeah.
Is that enough to win? I'm not saying it is, because again, we saw this in 2016. Trump barely had a ground game, relied on the RNC, and didn't stop him from winning that election. But I do think we tend to overstate 2016, the importance of 2016. We've had 3 elections since then, 2 midterms, 1 presidential. Republicans have performed badly in all 3 of them. Democratic enthusiasm, Democratic turnout has been significantly higher. I have a weird analogy for this race that no one else is going to have, and that is the 2017 Virginia governor's race. And here's why. In that race, Ed Gillespie versus Ralph Northam. Northam was a Democrat. Gillespie gets huge turnout in rural Virginia. Huge turnout, bigger than Trump got in 2016. The problem is Democrats got even bigger turnout in Northern Virginia, which is where most of their voters are. And Northam wins. And I see something similar here, too. I think you might see big turnout from Trump supporters. They do love him. They do want to vote for him. But as I said before, guy's got a low ceiling. And if the Harris people can mobilize their voters and get them out at the levels they did in 2020, the levels they did in the midterms, I think she wins. Again, this goes back to who's got the higher ceiling. She does. That, to me, gives her the advantage.
Yeah, because the question I've always struggled with is who are the new people who have just learned about Donald Trump? But you know what? I hadn't been paying attention.
Sure.
But that guy, but I think those new people might be people who are affected by same people. Maybe they've just entered the world of politics or for whatever reason, and they're animated by two specific issues, immigration and trans anything. And I worry about those two issues bringing in people, liberal, white, suburban folks. I'm thinking about my district here north of the city and what I hear and what I saw in our board of election. I know a lot of liberal Democrats voted for the right-wing crazy people because of what they were concerned in terms of trans kids' use of bathrooms. And it was a crazy thing to see people who weren't political get political. And I worry about that issue and immigration. And maybe there's another one that turns out people that never voted or care suddenly. COVID, I guess you could throw that in, brought a whole bunch of new people in as well.
Look, I think that's reasonable. I think we don't know if that'll drive a lot of voters to polls. I think what we have to look at 2022, we did see a huge uptick in support among women for Democratic Party, Democratic candidates. We particularly related to the abortion issue. That might drive some of these voters, but I just think that it might be canceled out by the fact that Harris is playing with a larger pool of voters than I think Trump is. My theory of this race has always been Trump has to win with huge turnout, enough Democrats stay home or switch sides. Yeah. I'm not seeing the switch sides thing. Stay home, maybe, but I haven't seen it yet.
I think stay home question as a result of the switch from Biden to Harris. What do you think that changed in terms of motivation for voters and bringing in especially new young voters who were so out of it, according to every young person I talked to? They really were not into Joe Biden anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this is a question I rely on. I think we have a problem with some of the polling here. If you look at some of the large sample polling, youth voters, black voters, Hispanic voters, we're seeing numbers that are pretty good for the Harris campaign. Harvard poll has showed basically pretty good numbers among youth voters, I think better than what Biden did. Among Hispanic voters, all the large sample polls that I've seen basically show Harris matching or topping, maybe slightly below in some, Biden's numbers. So if that's the case, it comes down to a question of turnout. Yeah. In the early voting, we're seeing some good signs for Democrats, places like Michigan, to some extent Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, we're seeing not good signs for Democrats, pretty negative signs for Democrats. I think Florida, well, it's not really a swing state, but that's another place that doesn't look so good for Democrats. But in general, it's hard to get a read on some of the early voting. But again, I think I look at something like Detroit, we're seeing massive turnout Michigan and places like Detroit, a good turnout places like Philadelphia. That's where the Harris campaign has to clean up. And if they do, again, I'll say it again, if they get good turnout in the inner suburbs, places around Milwaukee, around Detroit, around Philadelphia, and they get the strong minority turnout they get in every election, she will win. Now, we'll see if that happens. But that's how she wins.
I think she's going to win big and early.
See that I can't. Maybe I don't know. Look, I'll tell you something. That's
based on
what?
My predisposed vulnerability and ongoing vulnerability to optimism.
Yeah, optimism. I'm usually a pretty optimistic guy, but when it comes to politics, I don't. Optimism isn't my thing. It's more, what does the data tell me?
I think maybe I also have done a disproportionate amount or think a disproportionate amount about women and girls and interviewed those types of guests and talking to my daughters. And I just feel that the abortion issue, Brett Kavanaugh, the fact that we elected a rapist in 2016 hasn't gone away. And I just feel like women are going to save us.
Look, that's certainly what happened in 2018. It's what happened in 2022. To happen in special elections. One thing I think is interesting is it didn't happen in 2020. I think one of the really fascinating data points from 2020 is that Biden did worse among women voters than Hillary did. Now, maybe that should be accepted because she's a woman, but of course he did better than she did. He did much better among men than she did. But I think this election, I would expect Harris to do as well, if not better, than Hillary did. I think she won by 11 points, if I remember correctly, in 2016. I do think you're right. I think the gender gap is a huge factor in Harris's favor. But look, that gap goes both ways. She's having problems with male voters, but women tend to vote more than men do in general. I think it was 53-47 in the last election, women versus men. If that number if it's 54-46, 55-45, women versus men, this is a landslide for Harris. But we don't know. And I think one of the things that is difficult about this election is that it's hard to trust the polling on this. And so I don't think we have a good sense of what you've got. Polls that have registered voters with Harris with a 4-point lead and likely voters Trump with a 1-point lead. I think it's in Pennsylvania. I don't know what to make of that or how to read that. Or Quinnipiac, which had a Michigan poll that had Trump up 3 and then suddenly Harris up 4. One of those is wrong because it didn't turn 7 points in 2 weeks. That doesn't happen.
Right.
Not in American politics.
I want to zoom out and I want to talk about political journalism and its role. You've written about this recently at your Substack and really interesting. I think it matters. I think it's the most important thing always. I think media is what influences opinions. And I think I studied right-wing media as I got into radio. Working at SiriusXM, I was working at the comedy channels, but I got very interested in the political channels and then very ambitious about having my own show on one. But what I did was I watched them and I watched their audiences and I listened to them. And that never stopped. And I still follow and think about specifically right-wing media, but we can talk about the mainstream corporate media as well, especially now with the billionaire ownership and the decisions not to print endorsements. But this is such an important issue because it influences all of us in a way it didn't when there was a few newspapers and a kind of an general agreed upon reality with conspiracies pushed out to the fringes. Now Democrats control the weather. The election is ready.
You mean the Jews?
It's code for Jews. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Just so we're clear on that point. I'm actually on the weather subcommittee.
You are now. We hadn't talked in a year, and you got a huge promotion. That's great.
Huge promotion. Yeah, I'm on the weather subcommittee. Yeah, that's why it's been such a beautiful fall in New York.
I was actually going to make that joke. Is that why we haven't had rain in 26 days?
That's why.
Well done, sir. So what do you make?
The Jews don't like rain, so no rain for you people.
Question is about media and its influence on our thinking. And the larger point is what is happening in our country and in media in general around the world as we see the downfall of what we refer to as mainstream media. Like, where do we all land?
It's funny. I have a little bit of a different view about this. And I want to pick up on something that happened yesterday on CNN. Mehdi Hasan was on, and there was a right-wing agitator who basically made a joke. Not a joke. He made a comment and said, he and Mehdi were arguing about Israel-Palestine. He said, I hope your beeper doesn't go off, which is a reference.
Probably everybody that's listening to us has heard that because I can't imagine a moment, and that was late last night, we were talking less than 12 hours, anyone who turned on their computer and didn't see that echoing around.
It was pretty gross, and Mehdi and I have our disagreements, but that is disgusting, and he does not deserve to be spoken to like that. But what I was struck by is that this is a pathetic nature of something like CNN because they're putting on people who are marginal political voices, people who are good at making glib statements about politics but don't really know a lot about politics. They had Kevin O'Leary on last week, who's the guy from Shark Tank who knows less about politics than my dog. And I think this is a desperate play for ratings because no one's watching these shows anymore.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate because CNN, I think, does some good journalism and they have some smart people on this show, but people don't watch anymore. And so they have to put on these shout fests and these sort of people who are going to take a piss in the punch bowl to get attention. And it's not, it speaks to me about some sort of quiet desperation in a lot of political media. Look, I'm sure you want to talk about the Bezos thing at Washington Post. And look, the Washington Post endorsement of Kamala Harris will not move a single voter. Let's be honest about that. But what it matters because this is the president of the CEO, the owner of the newspaper, 11 days before election saying we no longer support doing endorsements of candidates. Oh, really? 11 days before? Give me a fucking break. And I think that it's very hard not to draw the conclusion that Bezos is doing this because he doesn't want to piss off Donald Trump. And that speaks to another issue, which is that our media organizations are controlled by a lot of rich people who don't really care about the news. People shit all over the New York Times, and I get why, but the people who own the New York Times do seem to care about the New York Times, care about the news, and care about what their responsibilities are. I don't get the sense that Jeff Bezos does.
And the guy at the LA Times as well.
And the guy at the LA Times, too. And that's a problem for media in general. We have owners who just look at newspapers as a way to make a profit. And I understand the need to make a profit, but Jeff Bezos literally sleeps on a giant bed of money. A giant bed of money. He has turned the Washington Post into a much better newspaper. But he's also, I think, this does show the malign influence of these owners on the media industry and how that has a larger societal effect. You don't have kind of media ownership that really wants to see news outlets do good journalism.
I feel like there's one narrative that we are settling into to a certain extent, at least I am, of the bad billionaires versus the rest of us, humans and critters and bugs and everybody affected by climate, not to mention the downfall of democracy. I think all billionaires are bad in terms of they shouldn't exist. We can argue about that. But more importantly, there are some billionaires who donate almost all of their money, make a living now donating. Bezos, I believe, his ex-wife is one of the richest people in the world, and she's a philanthropist. And so you can be a philanthropist. But the point I'm looking at is the bad billionaires versus the rest of us, including the critters. What do you think of that narrative?
I think there's an argument I heard years ago.
They own our brains and our hearts and our souls. They can manipulate us so easily in so many ways through media and entertainment and all of it. Sorry.
I love somebody, I think said years ago, the presence of so many billionaires in American society is evidence of a policy failure, in that we're not taxing wealthy people appropriately enough so that we don't have so many billionaires. But I don't begrudge people who make lots of money, want to make lots of money. And I don't know if I think all billionaires are bad, but I think like the one who owns Twitter seems like a pretty bad guy. And I don't know if Bezos is the bad guy. I like Amazon. I think they do some good stuff, but I think they do good stuff. They don't do good stuff. I think they're an easy place to shop. But I think that I worked at the Boston Globe for a long time. We had a billionaire owner, John Henry, who was very focused on making profit. And then I think before I left, they were making a profit. But I always felt like you've got more money than God. You should be focused on putting out the best paper you can put out and informing the public. And that's a civic duty and responsibility. I just think a lot of these billionaires don't look at it that way. It's funny how they look at philanthropy. They're all very philanthropic. But when it comes to like media, they think, I want to make money. I want to be the one billionaire who I can make money in the media industry.
Arguably, you need someone wealthy entity or person to fund a major news organization that employs hundreds, if not thousands of people, because it's not going to make a profit unless you do what CNN and others are trying to do, which is get people to argue, to get people to watch, to get people to click. If we water it down to clicks, that's the conversation, how you make money, then that's the model that you need, and you're not going to make money. Yes. So you need a billionaire, maybe funder, if you're going to have a news organization that employs hundreds, if not thousands of people. But maybe we can just have a bunch of boutique outfits, Michael.
But I think when we do, that's what I run, right? I have a boutique outlet. But I think what's happening at CNN is something a little bit different. I think CNN and a lot of the cable nets are losing relevancy. And so they're just not a destination. We have too many media options. And I don't know that people want to. And look, the news industry really did well under Trump and has not done as well under Biden. And I don't know if it will do as well under Harris if she wins. And I think this is like a scream for relevancy. That's how I viewed that clip yesterday. This is CNN trying to remain relevant and not really succeeding in doing it. Or I shouldn't say that. Or going about it in such a way that I think undermines their editorial sort of process or their editorial approach.
We disagree on Jeff Bezos. You won't make a judgment on him because you're more mature and want to maintain a certain type of credibility. I will. I think he's a bad person. And I think if you want to be a good billionaire, then all you have to do is buy Fox News and then just close it or rename it something and make it whatever you think is more objective as a television news gathering journalistic outfit. But they're obviously not going to make that decision. Just buy Fox News and shut it down. That's never going to happen. Although they did lose what, $700 million in that lawsuit?
$1 million he gave to Dominion, which was nothing, by the way. Nothing.
Elon Musk's influence on the campaign, say a little bit more about that, not to mention his very overt sexism, racism, anti-Semitism, and it really hates pretty much everybody, but except for other South African white billionaires.
And there's a good story out today, I think it's in the Journal, that basically shows that Republican, what's it called? The Twitter users are getting more amplification on Twitter than Democrats are. When you're seeing that the algorithm seems to be pushing more people toward Republican voices. Twitter it's a useful way to keep up on breaking news, but it's nowhere near as good a place as it used to be because of Musk. And Musk is just a weird dude. I was struck by something the other day. I was watching something on TV and I saw there was a Harris ad that was attacking Trump for having all these billionaire friends, and they mentioned Musk in there. If you're mentioning Elon Musk in an opposition ad, I'm not sure he's helping your campaign all that much. And by the way, this is interesting to me, to the point you're bringing up here. Apparently, the most run ad by the Harris campaign is the ad where they basically criticize Trump for wanting to give tax breaks to his billionaire buddies. So this economic
for wanting to give tax breaks to his billionaire buddies, that's the ad.
Yeah, and how he's looking out for them and not for you. It's a very populist message, and it seems to be the one that the Harris people are leaning into in their ads. I think it's really fascinating, and I'm actually not surprised by it. Obama did something very similar in 2012, running against Mitt Romney. Yeah. It is actually an effective campaign message that I think
wasn't it Bernie Sanders' most popular message and still is to some extent?
I don't know. It's very possible. I think, yeah, he has some other messages I think that weren't as popular that maybe undercut the billionaire message. But I think that surely it did. But a lot of people gravitate. If you're saying this is what I'm hearing about why this. Yeah. No, I am. And this is a shift, by the way. I first picked up on in 2012 when I did something that was really unusual. He ran against Mitt Romney for wanting to cut taxes. Now, Democrats for years had always tried to play Me Too when it came to tax cuts. Yeah. I always think about Clinton 92 calling for a middle class tax cut. But Obama in 2012 kind of went after Romney on this particular issue, in part because Romney was a wealthy guy, in part because he was seen as out of touch. But they play at this sort of populist economic message. And it is interesting to me that I think in each cycle you've seen Democrats talk about increasing taxes on the wealthy, which they usually were afraid to do. Because when Democrats say increasing taxes, Republicans say, "I want to tax on everybody."
Yeah,
but they're saying no one to do this, and they're not afraid to make that mess. To make that.
I think it shows how much the Overton window has changed on that conversation about wealth, and I think that's a great thing. I think it
is. Yeah. I think it's good for Democrats. Look, I think we should be talking more about income inequality, but I think it might also be a reflection of who Republicans are nominating.
Yeah, good point. Well,
the billionaire in 2000, he's not a billionaire, but a multimillionaire in 2012, 2016, 2020, now 2024.
We could talk, and I love talking with you about different ideas and policies and laws and decisions that politicians and leaders make and how they affect the electorate and how they affect elections and campaigns. But I just feel like one of the great examples was Kamala Harris introducing this new Medicare benefit, the at-home care thing. And it was something we haven't really discussed in healthcare, and it got very little attention. And the point I'm trying to make is no matter what the policy is, even the Middle East or any other foreign conflicts, anything you want to discuss, it's all drowned out in my opinion, because with the MAGA folks, whatever you want to call them, the Trump supporters, they don't think about policy or laws very much. Immigration and trans, some of these other things that animate them, certainly. But it's more of a feeling and more of this idea of being cruel and being mean and hurting people. You saw what that rally was, what it personified. How much of that do you agree with it? It's not really so much about policies that motivate and activate us, and it's certainly not about character. You can't make that argument. And so many people say, I don't care about the character of Trump. What I like is that he's an asshole to people like you and people I hate.
But that goes both ways, right? Because the character issue hurts Trump more than it helps him. I think that, look, my general view on policy is that it's less important people make it out to be. There's a great book by Larry Bartels, Chris Scratch, called Democracy for Realists. One of the best books I've read about politics. basically makes the argument that most people don't understand policy. And to the extent that they do understand it, they basically just follow the cues of political leaders. So if with the Trump people, right, this used to be a free trade party, now it's a protectionist party. Now it's like a ostentatiously, guys calling for tariffs. And Republicans have been fine with that shift. I think it's just followed his lead on it. So I do think that some policy issues do matter. Abortion matters a great deal, right? That's an emotional, it's a issue. It's a social issue. It's a health issue. It's a human rights issue. But in general, a lot of these policy things just don't really penetrate because people don't. I think there's a larger reason for this. I think people don't view what happens in Washington as affecting their lives.
Right.
Not when it comes to the economy so much, not when it comes to healthcare. Now, there are exceptions. Things like running on Obamacare certainly has helped Democrats the last few cycles. But in general, I don't know that rolling out a new policy can actually turn the electorate in your favor, especially since you have a politician like Trump who is so well defined. And you joked about it earlier, but people have an opinion about Trump. And it's much more about the vibes around Trump than it's about, he's not running any policy at all except deporting immigrants. He really isn't. This is one of the most policy-free campaigns I've ever seen from a candidate, from Trump, except for 2020. And it's really about vibes. It's about political tribalism, and it's about character. I don't know that policy plays much of a role here because I think partly because both candidates talk about this in sort of existential terms. Trump wins, democracy is over, right? If Harris wins, America is over, right? And that's the way that they talk about it, which makes it hard to say, okay, but what about Kamala's Medicare plan for home care?
Yeah.
I just think that this election is being fought on a much larger plane, where the minutia and the specifics of policy just don't matter as much. But then again, I say that, and then I'm like, wait a minute, abortion is a really important issue. So there are some policy issues, I think, that do get through. I just think that on a lot of the policy issues, it's really hard to penetrate people's minds.
It's hard to understand how government spending or regulations
it really is.
help or hurt you, but it's not hard to understand that if I'm raped, it's so simple to understand. It's the most, you could be a child, you could be an 8-year-old and understand that. The moment you find out about sex and sexuality, you could understand what that means for you. And hold on.
Don't you think that there's something else going on here too, which I think is that for a lot of women, the abortion issue isn't just about abortion. It's about their place in society.
Yes.
You have people who are grandmothers. You have people who they're not in a situation in which abortion is going to be a medical choice for them, but they have children. They may remember a time when abortion was illegal.
Yes.
So I do think that the abortion issue is in some ways a cultural issue, an emotional issue. It's also it's a symbolism. There's a symbolism to it that maybe even overwhelms from a policy standpoint. Because look, from a policy standpoint, this is something I'm sort of amazed by, is that you look at something like Ohio, which had a referendum a couple of years ago on abortion, voted overwhelmingly on the pro-choice side. This is the same state where Mike DeWine, who's signed lots of anti-abortion legislation, won by 20-something points, and J.D. Vance won.
Right.
And Trump is going to win. So I think people, when they can vote on abortion, then that issue ends up, let's put it this way, when abortion's on the ballot, it's good for the pro-choice side. But it doesn't necessarily translate into political results in places like red state America. Florida is actually one of the states that's most supportive of abortion rights. And yet, again, 2 years ago, Ron DeSantis, who signed a 6-week ban into law, won re-election by 15 points.
Yeah.
I think, so that's why it gets me to this viewpoint that abortion in itself is maybe not what's even driving some of this. It's what it represents.
Yes, I think there's a lot of truth to that, because I like to say it's not just abortion, it's birth control, it's health care if you have lady parts. It's access to health care. It's also the pain gap that I've heard a lot of research on, that women just deal with a lot higher health care. But it's just an inferiority that you can feel when this conversation is being had. But I love what you said about, because I'm so flummoxed that people don't care about Donald Trump's character and they could vote for him. But what you said is the converse of that, which matters more. Yeah, actually, more people do care. That's why more people don't vote for him. So it's always upsetting to see people support a guy like that. But it's also good to see that most people don't support him because of that. I think it's.
I think, and I just went to that point. Like, I see people say he can win again, like he won in 2016. Have we all forgotten what happened in 2020? He lost re-election, right? He lost re-election. And I always make this point because I think people don't realize he never led in the polls against Biden, even before COVID. Going back to September of 2019, every single poll, he's never within 4 points of Biden. And my take and his favorabilities in March 2020, before the pandemic started, and in November 2020 were basically the same. And what I take away from that is that people made up their minds about Trump and his presidency, and they didn't like it. Yeah. Now, not everybody, obviously, but a majority of Americans were not going to support this guy. And it's why he lost by, 5 points, 4.5 points in the election. And so I guess, to my mind, the character issue is, and by the way, he was polling behind Biden. This is pre-pandemic when the economy could not have been stronger, right? Could not have been any better than it.
Yeah.
And what that tells me is that ultimately character, or in his case, lack thereof, is what did him in. And I think that's what my take is on this election. You look at his favorabilities and they are basically unchanged for most of the last 4 years. My conclusion from that is that a majority of Americans have made up their minds about this guy and they don't like him. Now, can he still win? Sure. If enough Democrats stay home, if there's a massive Republican turnout. But this is why I think she's going to win. I think people have made up their minds about him and they don't like him. And it's really hard to undo that.
Great analysis. As always, I've missed it. I'm so grateful to have you here. Thank you very much for talking to me today.
Pete, it's my pleasure. It's good to be back. And I'm glad that you're doing better. And I'm glad that you had me on again. It's great.
All right, there you go. Michael Cohen, everybody, is back. Truth and Consequences is his Substack. Go support him. Let him know you heard him here on the show. Follow him and support him. All the links in the show notes for all of my guests. You can learn more, including about Susie and Scott Haveman, in the show notes. But that's all I've got for you today. I don't know if I'm staying in Philadelphia to see Heather Cox Richardson, but if I do, I'll try to bring you some of that tomorrow, or at least my experience there. And that's it. That's all I've got. This is a lot. I hope you appreciate it. I hope it came off well from the hotel room where I'm staying just outside Philadelphia today. And thank you for your support. I can't do it without you. I can't go on the road. I can't do any of these things without your support. So please, you are my main source of income. So subscribe, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. You can always upgrade your subscription, and you can help by writing a rating and review at Spotify or Apple's podcasts, or subscribe on all the social media outlets, all of which I am on and trying to put more material out on. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at our hangout. It's also my birthday, so we'll have a good time and make fun of me, take the piss out of me, roast me, whatever you want. I don't care. It doesn't have to be at all about me. Honestly, I'm psyched to see you all at the hangout, and my main focus this year certainly isn't on my past year or my next year, which is 49. It's on the next couple of days, and then I can decide where I want to go, both with the podcast and my life, and where, frankly, I want to live. You know, I mean, do I move to the mountains? Do I stay where I'm at? There are a lot of people asking that question as well. Send me an email. I'll get to your emails as well. standupwithpete@gmail.com. All right, bumblebees, that's it. I love you. Bye-bye.
Stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.